Okay. You know what? I'm gonna get sued over this, and right now I really don't care anymore. The shit I've seen by now is so fucked up. Most of you people aren't even gonna believe me. But this needs to get out. No matter what the cost. I work, or worked, for a very big research company. And no, I'm not a scientist. I'm a security guard. Honestly, I'm barely above minimum wage, and I had to sign a fuckload of NDAs. Even though, for the most part, I have no idea what's going on at the company I work for. I only knew that they were into pharmaceuticals. Researching new drugs, and cures, and all that. And hey, that's pretty neat. They were trying to save the world. A lot of respect for that. My job was to guard the door. Anyone comes in, they need to have a valid badge that gets cleared by me. I've never had a problem with it, and very few people have ever given me any trouble. In hindsight, the first inkling I got over what was going on was when I overheard a few of the eggheads chattering as they left the lab for lunch one afternoon. I caught a few snippets of conversation like returning cognitive function and reversible brain death, which all sounded pretty cool. I mean, I read somewhere that someone else returned some brain function to a dead pig, and I got to wondering if these folks were doing something similar. I mean, that would be pretty cool, right? I got to think about the wonders of modern science and dazzle at what the future held for medical advancements for a little bit, provided a bunch of middle-aged suburban moms didn't get in the way. That was a good feeling. I didn't hear much about whatever project they were working on after that. I mean, that's fine. The eggheads were supposed to keep work at work and not let it out. Can't have the competition hearing about it or have things leaking. I mostly forgot about that snippet of a conversation I'd heard, and went back to spending my days checking badges and scrolling social media when I wasn't busy. Then came Brian. Brian Mendelsohn and I had never talked much. He was a mid-tier level employee who had a weekday shift that ended at 7. He was portly, balding, and kind of resembled the sick love child between Matthew Broderick and Danny DeVito. He'd been working at the lab as long as I'd been there, so I didn't think much of him. He was just another passing face that I never spoke to. He sure as hell never acted suspicious. When he left one night, a little early, with a stiffer posture than I remembered and a briefcase I didn't remember seeing him with before, I didn't think too much of it. I noticed. That was my job, after all. But I didn't say anything to him. He looked at me expectantly as he got halfway to the parking lot, and I awkwardly waved at him. Brian awkwardly waved back, before he got into his car and drove off. The next morning, I got called into the office to get screamed at by my boss. Someone had stolen some samples from one of the labs. There was no evidence of a break-in, so the conclusion was that it had to be one of the people with clearance. A good old-fashioned case of industrial espionage. Well, there was only one guy I could think of who'd been acting suspicious, and that was Brian. I told him that, too. I don't know the details of what happened next. I know that they looked into him, but they didn't find anything. I wasn't fired, since there was no way to prove the theft happened on my watch, or that the thief had been easily visible. I was, however, told to inspect all bags upon exit to ensure that no one was smuggling anything out. I targeted Brian at first, of course. He'd been the obvious suspect, so naturally I wanted to make sure he wasn't pulling some kind of con, stealing samples and selling them for a bit of side money. Over the next week, though, nothing happened. No one tried anything, and I went back to my usual life. I watched the news on my phone in between browsing Reddit, And I remembered there'd been some controversy over a local funeral home misplacing the body of a college student who'd hung herself. Damn shame. And she'd been a beauty, too, a cute girl by the name of Taylor Jones. Probably a little too young for me, but still cute. Always a shame when a cute girl dies. Brian avoided eye contact as I checked his bag a few nights later. He seemed distracted and kept looking at his phone. He'd emptied out his pockets for me as instructed, but I didn't really find anything out of the ordinary. And he didn't speak either. "All right, you have a nice night," I said, nodding at him. He nodded back and left abruptly. Sure enough, the next morning there was another break-in. A vial of something had been stolen, and I had proof that I'd checked everyone's bags. The security camera footage showed me doing it, so I was as pissed off as the head honchos were, and there wasn't jack shit they could do about it. I was doing my job, and they knew it. Even if I wasn't in trouble, though, I was a little concerned about how someone had managed to sneak past me. I mean, sure, there are ways to do it. Brian could have taped the vial to his body under his clothes. He could have put it in his mouth or up his ass. Like I said, I do recall him not speaking at all to me, and I chalked it up to just plain rudeness. I say Brian because I had a sneaking suspicion that it was him behind all of this. Just a feeling in my gut. I couldn't prove it, but he seemed so much shiftier lately. This set up a whole string of debates about just how far they could search their employees to see if they were hiding something. Did we really need to go as far as to do a cavity search on our own employees? Was that actually necessary? I got to thinking about it, and I really didn't want it to go that far. Plus, the more I stewed on it, the more pissed off I got. Here I was working my ass off for barely minimum wage, and some asshole already making more than I would ever make was stealing their own work to sell and make even more money. Now that pissed me off, and it's what got me really thinking. What was Brian even up to, assuming it was him? He hadn't stopped acting suspicious. He always seemed to leave early, and hurried to his car after work. He couldn't have acted more guilty if he tried. I got it into my mind to do a little investigation. I took a night off, and when quitting time came, I waited in my car down the street for Brian to leave work. Sure enough, a minute or so before 7, Brian's car pulled out of the lot and he started driving. I followed at enough of a distance so he wouldn't get suspicious. I didn't want to spook him. Brian drove until he was well out of town, and I started to wonder if I was just following him home. I mean, this was a gross invasion of privacy, and I was starting to have doubts. He eventually got off the highway and pulled into a motel, a good hour away from where we worked. Jesus, did he live here? I parked on the street and watched from a distance as he got out of his car and went to talk to the motel clerk. Through the window, I saw the clerk give him a key and smile at him. It didn't look like Brian paid anything. Brian walked out of the office and to a nearby motel door, where he went inside and closed it behind him. Had I just watched this guy go to a booty call? I left and stewed on it for a day or so. Brian's behavior hadn't really changed at all over the next few days. On my next day off, I followed him to the motel again. This time, after he was in his room, I opted to go into the office and have a chat with the clerk. The guy behind the desk was a weaselly-looking bastard with a toque who stank of cigarette smoke. "We're full up," he said gruffly. "Nothing at all, huh?" "I said we're full. Sorry, you're gonna have to go elsewhere." He didn't stand up, he just watched me, waiting for me to leave, and I didn't really try to engage this guy in any further conversation. I didn't leave just yet, though. I walked past the rooms, listening closely. There wasn't much sound at all. It was quiet. No voices, no TV, nothing. I stopped by one of the darkened motel room windows and peered inside cautiously. This looked empty, even though the clerk had said they were full. Come to think of it, I hadn't seen any cars outside, save for Brian's and 2 others. The motel looked like it had way more capacity than that. Then I saw movement in the bedroom. Clearly someone was walking around in there. I had an idea and I knocked on the door. "Housekeeping?" I said it in my best customer service voice. No response. Frowning, I tried the door. Locked. I tried something else. Now, I know that my job is technically security, but I didn't have the best upbringing. I may or may not have been a wild child, and doing that taught me a number of things, including how to pick a lock. The door came open easily once I'd picked it, and when I looked inside I could see the figure of a person standing in the darkness. "Oh, shit, sorry, I didn't know anyone was in here," I said. Still no sound. "Hello?" I reached for the light switch and turned it on. The woman standing in the room was blonde, beautiful and naked as the day she was born. She stared at me with a vacant expression, and I slowly drew closer to her. "Oh, shit, ma'am, I'm sorry, I didn't know you were..." She just stood there, not trying to hide herself. It was like there was no one even home. She just fucking stood there. "Ma'am?" I took a step closer, and as I studied her face, I realized I knew her from somewhere. Looking closer, the bruises on her neck helped it all click into place. This was the girl I'd seen on the news. The one who'd hung herself. The one whose body had gone missing. Taylor Jones. For the longest time, I just stared. I mean, what the hell was I going to do? I tried to reason away what I was seeing. I mean, there's got to be tons of cute blonde chicks around, right? Especially ones with ligature marks who stand naked in motel rooms in the dark and don't move. I had to get her out of there. I mean, she was clearly drugged up or something, right? I took her by the hand and she went along with me with absolutely no resistance. I caught a glimpse of the bed and saw an open box of condoms on the table beside her. It turned my stomach to imagine what they were doing there. I just made it through the door when someone clotheslined me with a baseball bat. I hit the ground hard and without anything even remotely resembling dignity. My ears were ringing and I saw stars. Now, you're gonna pay for that." I recognized the hostile drawl of the motel clerk as I writhed on the ground. I saw him gently push Taylor back into the room before he stepped in as well. He grabbed me by the back of the shirt and dragged me into the room with him. "Now this is an unfortunate predicament we're in," the clerk said. He guided Taylor towards a nearby chair and made her sit. "What the hell did you do to her?" I murmured as the clerk sat down on the bed. "Do to her? Not a damn thing. If anything, she did it to herself." "You faked her death and brought her here," I replied. "I saw her on the news." "Faked it?" The clerk scoffed. "I think you've got it all wrong." I got to my knees and looked over at Taylor in her chair. She didn't move, didn't react to us at all. The door opened and I saw Brian coming in. His shirt was untucked and the concern on his face grew when he saw me. "What the hell?" "You know him?" the clerk asked, pointing the baseball bat at me. "Yeah, he's the security guy at the lab." Brian frowned. "Jeb, how'd he get in here?" "Caught him poking around this room," the clerk, Jeb, replied. "Looks like he found our hanging girl here." "Jesus. I knew you shouldn't have gotten her. She was too high profile." Brian swore under his breath, never once taking his eyes off of me. "Hey, you didn't have any complaints when you were plugging her a couple days ago," Jeb snapped. "This whole operation was your idea, so don't dare shift the blame onto me." Well, you're the one choosing the girls, Brian replied, his temper rising. He stopped and rubbed his temples. We need to handle this, he said, and Jeb nodded, looking over at me too. What the hell are you guys doing here? What the hell did you do to that girl? We didn't do anything, Brian said. I mean, we didn't kill her, at least. She was already dead. The look on my face made it clear that I had no idea what he was talking about, so Brian elaborated. I assume you came because you were looking for the missing vials. Or at least you were wondering if I was selling them or something, right? I didn't answer, and he didn't bother waiting for me to. I don't suppose you know what was in those vials, do you? You probably don't even know what we do in that lab. Nothing as fucked up as this, I replied. Brian grimaced. We developed a mixture of chemicals that can stimulate a dead brain, restart a body, as it were. In effect, we can bring people back to life by simply giving them a needle right behind the eye. They're a little weary about doing human trials at the lab just yet, so I asked Jeb here if he'd let me experiment. I needed to see if it worked. Why? So you could fuck him? I asked. Brian pursed his lips. That wasn't the original plan, he admitted. The subjects regain low-level cognitive functions, but they lose just about all higher brain functions. They're alive, but they're basically vegetables. I didn't really have much to do with my first few subjects, and Jeb's business mostly consists of prostitutes, so we made a little arrangement. Provided some in-house services, as it were. I provided him bodies, and he split the income with me. I stared at him in horror. You've been pimping out dead girls? Why the hell not? Jeb asked. Hot piece of ass, I won't say no. Doesn't need a cut. Never had so much business. The serum works, Brian insisted. Even if we did get a little sidetracked. You're insane. You're both fucking insane, was the only thing I could think to say, and Brian just sighed. And you're the result of my carelessness. He looked over at Jeb. Don't make too much of a mess. I'm sure we can frame it as a car accident or something. Jeb just smiled and nodded before raising the baseball bat. I wondered if he was expecting me to die easily, but I had no intention of going out like that. He hit me again with the bat, and I went down. All part of the plan. I kicked him in the knee as hard as I could, and I heard it crack. Jeb went down, and I saw the bat slip out of his hands. God damn it! Brian went for the bat. So did I. He made it there first, since he was walking and I was crawling. He raised it above his head as I hurried towards him, getting on my feet again. I tackled him right before he could hit me, slamming him into the wall of the motel. I tried to rip the bat from his grip. Jeb was on his feet again, and he grabbed me from behind, struggling to pull me off of Brian. The bat weakly bopped against my head, and I slammed my head backwards to hit Jeb in the face. I could feel his nose crunch. I resumed my attack on Brian, punching him in the face over and over again. I felt his glasses break beneath my fist, and Jeb tried again to pull me off. This time he succeeded, but not before I ripped the bat away from Brian. Jeb pushed me away, and his eyes widened when I saw he had the bat. I swung it at his face as hard as I could. He went down, and I kept swinging until I was sure he wasn't ever going to get back up. His corpse twitched on the floor, and I could see Brian watching from the corner of my eye. Jesus Christ. He blindly scrambled towards the door, hoping to escape, but I was faster. I seized him by the coat and threw him to the ground. No, wait, don't. I didn't care. I raised the bat and didn't stop hitting him until his head was nothing but a thick red paste. Covered in blood and exhausted, I sat down on the bed, panting heavily and finally looking at Taylor. She'd sat there throughout the violence, never once moving. She didn't even react to the corpses, and honestly, that was fine. I stared at her sadly, and after resting, I decided I had to look at the other rooms. There were 17 girls in that motel, including Taylor. I didn't recognize all of them, but I was pretty sure they didn't all die by suicide. 17 girls Brian had brought back to life, just so Jeb could run his little brothel. God, it made me sick. How many had he murdered? That was the question at the forefront of my mind. All of them? Most of them? The only one who could give me the answer was dead, and there was no way to bring him back, even with the serum. There wasn't a brain left to revive. Not that I would have, even if I'd wanted to. I burned the motel to the ground, and I made sure all the girls were right there in the middle of the fire when I did it. Better that they just die again than whatever else would have happened to them. If I'd called the lab and told them what had happened, I don't know for sure that they'd let those girls just stay dead. After Brian, I didn't want to risk trusting them again. I'm signing off now, and then I'm probably going to get sued, but I really don't care. Whatever those people in the lab are working on, it's not worth it. No matter what they do with it. There will always be more Brians and Jebs to exploit it. And I'll be damned if I'm ever going to let that happen again.